Okay, so we're going to get started.
All right.
All right, so for those who are going to watch this on YouTube later, this is the Swanstom family research that Adrian has done. Hope you find this interesting. So this is the final installment, by the way. I have been doing this research for all four branches of Adrian Wolf's grandparents. So you'll recall that we previously did the Garshas, and here's the link to that presentation. That was a rather interesting presentation. We had hunting pirates with the Spanish Royal Navy, swamp railroads, train robbers, and getting paid by Joseph Stalin to work in Ukrainian coal mines. So all fascinating stuff. We also did the Ramseys, so Richard Wolf's mother's side of the family. And the link is here to that one if you're interested. There were Scottish-Irish people who were originally from Scotland and then moved to Northern Ireland. Uh, Unfortunate instances where men were drunk and sent to the workhouse for their perpetual alcoholism, and service in the army in World War I, followed by creating musical comedies in the early 1920s. We also had done the wool, so my father's side of the family, involving German pharmacists who were typesetters at German language newspapers, self-made engineers, and changing of names during World War I, presumably due to anti-German sentiment at that time. So anyway, now we are going to the Swanstroms, my mother's side of the family. And so here's the, most immediate family tree that we're all familiar with. Katie, Julie, Gigi, John, the four children, and their children, their father, John Adrian Garcia Jr., and their mother, Virginia Burris Swanstrom. So that's the trace that we're going up from Virginia Burris Swanstrom. So we're going to start, as we did before, with the oldest ancestor and work our way back to the present. So what are we going to learn about in this presentation? We're going to learn about escaping Swedish famines, getting expelled from the college drama department, the town doctor, and you'll notice that's in parentheses or quotation marks there, in rural Kansas, and soprano singers in Hollywood. So here is the family beyond Virginia Burris Swanstrom. See here her father, John Magnus Swanstrom, her mother, Mabel Mary Burris, and the people further back from there. So I'll just pause there for a minute if you want to look over those names, if you recognize any of them. I suspect probably not. So we're going to start with the one circled in red there, Johan Jonsson Svanström. Johan Jonsson Svanström, and you'll notice the umlaut there, was born in 1836 in Grasmark parish in Sweden. And you'll see it here on the map. It's a little bit east of Oslo. It's kind of very close to the Norwegian border. He was the son of John Gunnarsson, and that's why John Johnson. So you may be familiar with that in the Scandinavian countries. They don't use last names in the way that we do today. There's Leif Erikson. Well, what that really means is Leif is the son of Eric. That's why it's Eriksson. And then Eric might be Eric Johnson, so and so forth and so on. They don't have consistent last names. Anyway, at age 26 in 1862, he moved to a town near to Grasmark called Naz, and he was basically a laborer on somebody else's farm. And on that farm, there was a daughter, a farmer's daughter, as the old stories go, and he married the farmer's daughter of the man he was working for. And they had children in 1863 and 1866. So very quickly, obviously, he got involved with this other young woman. And then in 1866, this may or may not be known to the group, there was a Sweden crop failure and a famine. And in the same way that the Irish had had a famine a few years earlier over their potatoes. Anyway, the government in Sweden handled the famine very poorly. There was really not a lot of aid or assistance provided to those who were literally starving. So many Swedes left the country for America. And so Johann left Sweden and first went to Stockholm, Sweden, Stockholm, Wisconsin, I should say, in 1868, where he worked on a farm. And Stockholm, Wisconsin, you will not be shocked to discover, is a sort of a Swedish immigrant colony. It's right along the Mississippi River on the western side of the state of Wisconsin, sort of close to Minneapolis. And so again, he was working on somebody else's farm for that year. But then he returned to Sweden in 1869 for his wife and two children who were still in Sweden. And so a little bit of background first as to where they're going to end up. In 1868, there was a company called the First Swedish Agricultural Company, which had purchased 13,000 acres of land in Kansas from the Union Pacific Railroad. The First Swedish Agricultural Company wanted to build an immigrant farming colony, a place for the Swedes who wanted to leave Sweden to go and have successful farms. The Union Pacific Railroad had gotten this land. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but when you build the Transcontinental Railroad, of course, we've kicked out all of the Native Americans. For each mile of railroad that you would build, my understanding is that the U.S. government gave the railroad 1 mile of land to the left and 1 mile of land to the right of the railroad. So suddenly the Union Pacific Railroad has a tremendous many tracts of land, but they're a railroad company, and what they're going to do is then sell that land to whomever wants to buy it from them. And so the First Swedish Agricultural Company bought some of 13,000 acres of land from the Union Pacific Railroad. And there was a Swedish pastor named Olaf Olsson who asked for permission to move to America with the Swedes who were starving back in Sweden. And strangely, the church refused his request. But he wouldn't give up, and he appealed to King Carl XV. And that's who you see on the right-hand side of this page here. And King Carl gave permission for the Swedes to leave and move to America. So this was actually a very long and difficult journey. And it was a very sort of mass migration, as it were. It wasn't just one or two people. Literally the whole village, it seems, packed up and moved with the pastor. So I don't know if anybody stayed behind, but I think the village was basically completely emptied out in one fell swoop. More than 100 people traveled with the pastor. They first walked to Gothenburg, Sweden, which is on the southwest coast of Sweden. Then they took a ship from Sweden across the North Sea to Edinburgh on the east coast of Scotland. Then the train across Scotland to Glasgow on the west coast of Scotland. And then a ship, the SS Columbia, sailed from Glasgow to New York. And you see here on the right, this is the SS Columbia. And then from New York, they took a train to Chicago. And then yet another train from Chicago to Salina, Kansas. And then from Salina, Kansas by wagon to Lindsborg, Kansas. That was the name of the town that they had founded. And it obviously has a Swedish name. And you can see here with the red arrow roughly where Lindsborg is. Now what's interesting is that not the full group made it to Lindsborg, Kansas. This is, I think, 1868 or 9, I said. This is still when the western states of America have Indian raids, and not all of the Native Americans have agreed to end up on reservations. The Wounded Knee Massacre that kind of ended the Indian resistance to American migration didn't happen for another 20 years later. So a meaningful fraction of the Swedish immigrant party didn't make it all the way to Kansas. They stopped in Missouri because they were afraid. They had heard of Indian raids happening in Kansas, so they were afraid they would be killed. So by the fall of 1869, the Swanstom family has arrived uh, near Lindsborg, Kansas, and they were working on a farm just to the southeast of the small town. And in 1875, Johann uh, was able to purchase that farm for $315. And this is through the Homestead Act, which is a federal statute where they would grant you the land, and then if you worked the land and improved the land and created a farm or a village or whatever it was, you would be given the opportunity to purchase the land. And then he bought another 80 acres a few years later. And on the right hand, you see the land office granting the property to John Swanstom, which is near Helena, Kansas. And he built a rather prosperous farm that grew corn, oats, rye, wheat, and potatoes. On the right hand, you see here, this is from Google Street View, this is the actual farm. This is what it looks like. He also owned 3 horses, 7 cattle, and 4 pigs. And the farm was successful enough that he hired farm workers. He had himself once been a sort of a farm laborer himself. Now he was employing farm laborers, including his own brother. And in 1877, so about 8 or 9 years after arriving in America, he became a U.S. citizen. And having become a citizen, his wife and his 2 children, who had been born in Sweden, also became citizens as well. And on the right-hand side here, you see this is John Swanstrom, a native of Sweden, gives up his loyalty to the King of Sweden and becomes an American citizen. In 1912, so many years later, he's working on this farm for many, many years. In 1912, he traveled with one of his sons, Luther, and we'll talk about his other children, to Oregon to visit the farm of one of his other sons, Frederick. Frederick had a farm in Oregon. And while he was visiting his son, Frederick, in Oregon, unfortunately, Johann died while he was in Oregon at age 75. Now, what's interesting is he was not returned. First of all, he wasn't buried in Oregon, and he was also not returned to Kansas, to Lindsborg, to be buried there. He was returned to the Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago. Several of his children had moved from Lindsborg, Kansas, to Chicago, left the farm for the big city, and he was buried near them in Chicago. And Oakwood Cemetery, in fact, is the very same place where John Garcia Sr. and Virginia Garcia are buried. So just by sheer happenstance, they're all in the same cemetery on the south side of Chicago. On the right-hand side here, you see that's the gravestone. So that was Johann Jonsson Svanström. Now we're going to talk about his wife, Kerstin, who changed her name to Christine, or went by Christine when she came to America, Håkansdotter. And of course, that's basically a reference to the fact that her father was Håkan and she's Håkan's daughter. So Kerstin Håkansdotter was born in Grasmark, Sweden also in 1840. And she arrived, of course, with the pastor and the large group of Swedes in 1869 to America. And she had 8 children. 2 of them were born in Sweden before they left, Anna and Håkan. And then they had 6 more children when they were living in Kansas. Johann, who went by John, Sophie, Martin, Frederick, Maria, and Luther. And on the right here, this is the church that Pastor Olson originally was the pastor for in Sweden. That's the church they left behind when they moved to America. So, as I said, they had 8 children. So Håkan, who also went by Ed, was the oldest son. And as far as we can tell, When his father died, he inherited the farm and continued to work on the family farm in Kansas. Uh, the other daughter that had been born in Sweden, Anna, married a Chicago doctor and then later retired to a fruit farm in southwestern Michigan.
Hmm.
Son Luther, born in America, became an attorney in Chicago and had argued cases before the Illinois Supreme Court. And he published a book on federal court procedure in 1938. Daughter Maria also moved to Chicago, and she ended up marrying the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. And that guy was the guy who prosecuted Al Capone. So Maria Swanstom was the wife of Al Capone's prosecutor. And that's the prosecutor here on the right. We're not related to him, but I thought you'd be interested in that. So a dangerous gig to be Al Capone's prosecutor, but he did it without uh, being afraid of being assassinated. Sophie was another one of the children. She moved to Chicago and she worked in a construction company, but she was also what was called a public orator and a poet and a playwright. So I think she gave public performances where she read her poems aloud or read a sonnet from Shakespeare or something like that. She was also the head of the drama department at Augustana College in Illinois. But for some unknown and unspecified scandal in 1898, she was forced to resign her position. So it's not clear exactly what that was. It might have been some sort of cohabitation with another professor, and they weren't married, and that was a terrible scandal in 1898. The son Martin moved to Chicago also. He worked in manufacturing. And then, as we mentioned earlier, one of the sons named Frederick moved to Oregon and had his own farm in Oregon. On the right here, this is a picture of Sophie. So after Johann died while he was visiting Oregon in 1912, Christine left the farm. She did not stick around and continue running the farm. And then she moved to Chicago, where most of her children had moved to. And she seemed to have lived with a series of her children over the years. Maybe they weren't all on the best of terms. I don't know why she didn't just stay with one child. In 1920, in the census, she was living with Sophie. In 1930, she was living with Maria. And in 1936, when she died at 96, she was living with Luther. And she was, of course, buried with Johann in Chicago at the same Oakwoods Cemetery. That was Christine Hakansdottir. Now we're going to talk about Johann John Magnus Swanstrom.
Hi, Gigi. Yes, right now he's doing it.
All right, put yourself on mute, Mom.
Okay. It's being recorded. It's being recorded, so it's okay. Okay. Well, go to Google Meet, and Google Meet is it's like Zoom.
Mom, put yourself on mute.
I'm sorry. Okay. I'll put this mute.
Okay, good. All right, I'll continue. All right, so now we're going to talk about Johann John Magnus Swanstrom, so Virginia Swanstrom's father. So Johann, who also went by John Magnus Swanstrom. You'll notice that the umlaut is now missing from the name. They've Americanized it. So John was born in 1870 in Lindsborg. He was the third child of the 8 that were born from that husband and wife. Now in 1894, he attended the Zenarian College of Penmanship in Ohio. And while there, he trained in drafting, calligraphy, and artistic drawing. And he was briefly a teacher of penmanship. So, a lost art in America is good handwriting. On the right-hand side, you see here, this is the Zenarian College building. And in 1899, he moved to Chicago to live with his sister, Sophie. and he was working as a bookkeeper. But he was apparently a self-taught mechanical engineer. We know that there were many engineers on the Garcia side of the family, but Johann or John was, as far as we can tell, not educated as an engineer at any formal schooling, but he was clever enough to found a company called the United Pump and Power Company, which had its own factory in Chicago around 1907. It manufactured engines, electric motors, and water pumps. And John Swanstom actually received 4 different patents between 1910 and 1923 for various mechanical contraptions. And on the right hand, you see here, this is one is a pneumatic pump. So in 1907, he was, the owner of a growing business. In 1908, he goes back to Kansas to marry Mabel Burris. Mabel was from another small farming community near Lindsborg. So he must have known her in some way, shape, or form before he had left for Chicago, and he went back to the small village to get married. On the right here, you see this is their marriage license from September of 1908. She was from a town called Burton, Kansas. Now, John and Mabel, which is a little bit unusual at the time, were only married for about 15 years, and they divorced sometime between 1920 and 1930. It's not clear what happened between also to his pump and engine company. It seems to have disappeared. It was probably wiped out by the Great Depression in the early 1930s. And then John moved to southwestern Michigan to live with his sister Anna in Buchanan, Michigan, which is where he died in 1950. And you see here on the right, this is where Buchanan, Michigan is located, so sort of across the lake from Chicago. So now we're going to talk about William Bidwell Burris, who is Virginia Burris Swanstrom's grandfather. William Bidwell Burris was born in 1839 in Jefferson County, Ohio, which is sort of to the southeast of Akron, sort of due west of Pittsburgh. And his father was a farmer. His mother died when he was 12, and then his father remarried. And they were living in Ohio in 1860 when William was 21. He was still living with his own family on that farm. But literally within a week after the end of the Civil War in 1865, his father sold that farm to his father's brothers, and the whole family moved out to Iowa. They moved to Wapello County, Iowa. And so you can see here with the arrow, Wapello County is sort of the southeast corner of Iowa. And when he was in Iowa in 1870, at age 31, he married Sarah Becker. And then Sarah and William, in turn, moved south from Iowa to Kansas, to a town called Colwich, Kansas, which is near Wichita. And William got his own farm, 168 farm in 1878, also again, probably through the Homestead Act. Now, he was a farmer and the son of a farmer, but in his early 40s, William began studying homeopathic medicine through the Pulte Medical College in Cincinnati. It's not clear whether he traveled to Cincinnati to study there or he did it through correspondence courses. Anyway, homeopathy is a pseudoscience. It's not really based on actual scientific medical knowledge, but it was somewhat successful in the 1800s because actual medical treatments were, leeches and other horrible treatments that were not actually helpful to the patient. So homeopathy, in some sense, was, ineffective, but it was at least not going to harm you. Anyway, William graduated from the Pulte Medical College, and that's the building you see here on the right, in 1886, in his 40s. And they moved from Colwich, Kansas, from that farm to a town called Burton, which is about 25 miles away, still in Kansas though. And he was then known as Doc Burris and went by William Burris, MD. So not truly a doctor, but kind of. But anyway, he was the town doctor, and he lived until the year 1910, and he died in uh, in Burton, and he was buried in a nearby town. I'm not sure why he wasn't buried in Burton, but he was buried in Maize, Kansas, and that's his gravestone on the right. That was William Bidwell Burris. Now we're going to talk about Sarah Ellen Becker, his wife. Sarah Ellen Becker was born in Iowa, and she met William Burris in 1870 in Wapello County, Iowa, and then they moved to Colwich, Kansas in 1873. And they had 3 children between 1877 and 1883, John, William, and Mabel. Now, this is not somebody we are directly related to. Mabel is our direct descendant, but this was a really sort of shocking thing. In the Long Beach Telegram, August 7th, 1944, there was a story on the front page about this is the very terrible story. John Burris, who was the oldest of the 3 children, was married to a woman and had 1 son. And John's wife had died, and they lived in Long Beach. John's wife had died. So John went into Los Angeles to make the funeral arrangements for his wife's mother, who had died in 1944. And while he was away for the day at the funeral parlor or whatever, his wife and his son got into an argument of some sort on the 7th-story apartment that they lived in. And the neighbor reported hearing shouting and screaming and yelling. It's not totally clear what happened, but the wife goes out the window, falls to her death onto the street below, and then the son jumps out after her and is also dead on the street below. So what a day for him. He's spent the
Ooh.
day making the funeral arrangements for his mother-in-law, comes home to discover that his wife and his son are both dead. And the building is still there. You can see this image here of the apartment building. If you go to this link on Google Maps, there's the exact same building. So whoever lives in this apartment doesn't realize it, but that was their apartment building. So Sarah Ellen Becker, as we mentioned, her husband was originally a farmer and then became a quote unquote doctor, and her husband died in 1910. And then she moved to Chicago. It seems like everybody moved from Kansas to Chicago, but her daughter Mabel had moved to Chicago and lived with her daughter, and she died in 1920 at her daughter's home, as this is her death certificate. So that was Sarah Ellen Becker. Mabel Mary Burris, who is Gigi, Julie, and Katie's grandmother, is the next person we're going to talk about. Mabel Mary Burris was born in 1883 in Colwich, Kansas, when they were originally on that farm, and then they moved to Burton, Kansas in 1887 when her father became a homeopathic doctor. And she was very active in high school theater and drama and performing in various ways. She did a graduation, high school graduation performance called Live to the Fullest Extent of Your Being. I wasn't able to get a copy of that, but that's what her presentation was. And you'll see on the right here, this is from the school newspaper, that Mabel Burris and Annabelle Frayne will favor the music club by singing a duet. And right after graduating from high school, she actually became a music teacher at her own high school. So you can imagine it was a little bit interesting to be a senior one year and then to be a teacher the following fall. She was a music teacher at various other Kansas schools. She married John Swanstom in 1908, Remember, he had come back from his pump and factory and married her in Kansas. And they had two children, Marjorie, who was born in 1910, and Virginia, grandmother Virginia Garcia, born in 1912. But as mentioned earlier, they divorced sometime between 1920 and 1930. So Mabel and her two daughters moved into their own separate apartment in 1930. And she taught music at a high school in Chicago called Tilden Technical High School. And she evidently passed on her musical talents to her two daughters. I think this is a picture of our
Yeah,
grandmother or your mother's.
yeah, it is.
So this is her playing a ancient oboe. Uh, I don't know. Anyway, found this very interesting. Now, Mabel, as mentioned, was very into performing and music. So she was a singer who performed on WGN, the Chicago radio station, multiple times. And you'll see here on the right, this is a picture of Mabel and then an advertisement for a performance that will be on the radio that evening. Taught at Tilden High School as a music teacher for many years and retired in 1948. In 1949, she moved to Phoenix, where her older daughter, Marjorie, lived. And then, for reasons that I could not figure out, she later moved to Los Angeles around 1955. I don't know why, or maybe Marjorie moved there as well. Maybe she did it on her own, but that's where she was. And she died in Los Angeles in 1964. And she was buried at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which is a relatively famous cemetery where the movie stars are buried. So Judy Garland is there, and Burt Reynolds, and Douglas Fairbanks, and whatever. This is her, not a gravestone, but they put your I think your ashes in a niche in the wall. This is the niche where she's buried at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery with all the other movie stars. So to recap, Johann Swanstom, he built a prosperous Kansas farm after leaving Sweden in the 1860s. Kirsten Håkansdotter survived a Swedish family with two children. John Swanstom was an inventor and a factory owner in Chicago. William Burris started as a farmer and then became a homeopathic doctor. And Mabel Burris was a music teacher and a semi-professional singer.
Very cool.
All the places that I've mentioned are found on this map, so if you want to look at this link, you can find the exact spot where the farm was located, or where somebody lived, or where somebody died, or uh, so forth. So if you ever want to visit, want to do a road trip and visit various gravestones, they're all listed here, dozens and dozens of them. If you want to, this is an interesting story that gives more details on how that large group of Swedes left Sweden in the 1860s, their unhappiness with the government providing no assistance or relief to those who are literally starving, and why they left and why they ended up in the town of Lindsborg, Kansas. So that's a longer version that's not specific to the Swanstroms per se. And that's it. That's the end of the the Swanstrom family research. If desired, we have the names you can see here of John Gunnarsson, Anna Lise Verme, and John Burris, and Mary Wood, and William Becker, and a woman named Rebecca. You can go further back from there if you wanted to. I didn't feel it would be especially productive, but we can go further back if anybody's desired. That's it. I will send, so there's all sorts of surplus stuff, like where the gravestones are located, um, and some sort of unknown questions I had that I wasn't able to um, get resolved. In particular, I was really hoping to find out that Mabel moved to Los Angeles because she was, singing on background on some Hollywood movie or something like that. She was on a record or something, but I couldn't find anything to that extent. So that's the end of the presentation. Any
Can
questions?
you hear us, Adrian?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fabulous.
Are you still recording right
Yes,
now?
yes. I can
Okay.
stop if you want.
Why don't you stop recording?